Hello, and this is the official Jameels channel, and we're reviewing film, music, magazines, radio, going back to the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. We're particularly looking at the 90s more recently, and I'm a veteran esoteric scholar, and I just want to put a little bit of juice in my interview, put a little bit of alternative research, something you might not have heard before in my interview. And it revolves around money. If you look at the penny with Abraham Lincoln on it, and you notice the penny is brown, copperish, dark tint of brown, a brown variety, but copper. And you look at all the other coins, from the half dollar to the dollar, to the dime, to the nickel, to the quarter. Notice how they're all turned in the opposite direction of Lincoln on the penny. All the other presidents face the opposite direction. And what this symbolizes, the mystery behind this, is Lincoln represents the freeing, the end of slavery. The freeing of slavery. The freeing of the slaves. And so all the presidents turned their back on Lincoln. Lincoln freed the slaves, freed colored people. So Abraham Lincoln has a colored coin, and Abraham Lincoln, they've all turned their back on Lincoln. That's the mystery. That's the symbolism in the coins. And I've spent years researching into these subjects, and I love to sit down and talk about esoteric research after years of being studying, all the people I've met and stories I've come across, a lot of things I remembered, and this is just a little preview demo I'm doing, and I encourage people to continue to research and look at money and finance, and there's a lot to be learned from the symbolism on money. All right. Hi, this is the Jameels official channel, and what I want to be doing is taking a look at a film called Sliver, and it's a wonderful film. I remember seeing the film in the early 90s, and the story takes place in an apartment building, a skyrise in New York City. Very beautiful building. And I'm going to get more into the film. This isn't the only video. This is just the beginning. We're going to get into the film, into the actors, and the directing, into the soundtrack. We're going to get into everything. But the film was a wonderful film. And it was about a woman living in a wonderful apartment complex, a skyrise, and she was under complete surveillance by the landlord, the management of the building, the man responsible for overseeing the building. He had cameras in every room, all throughout the apartment complex. He knew everybody's comings and goings, and it was a very exciting film. The reason why I'm getting into this film, and the reason why I'm going on to a movie that has so many years behind it, is because the simple fact is I lived through that period, through the early 90s. Historically, I looked into subjects having to do with the 1960s and 70s, and I still do to a large degree. But the early 90s was a very interesting time for me, and we're going to look at the movies, the films, we're going to look at the music, and some of the events. Another film that we're going to be getting into is Natural Born Killers, starring Woody Harrelson, which was a wonderful film. I might even touch upon some older films from the 80s, like Return of the Living Dead, which was my favorite movie growing up. I'm from an area known as Muskegon, Michigan, and I grew up in Muskegon, Michigan, and I've traveled all over the world, but I'm from Muskegon, Michigan, and my life in Muskegon, Michigan has been very interesting. And I've met a lot of notable people in other states. I do interviews with all different sorts of people, regular people, famous people, you name it. But my life here as a child growing up was definitely inspired by films that I watched. And I remember at the time that I saw this film, I was about 7 years old, around there, and I lived in an apartment complex. And that was an interesting period of my life. I had recently, around that time, met Muhammad Ali, the famous boxer. Around this time, I began listening to music. My grandfather loved classical music. My grandfather owned a beautiful piano. He lived out in the country, owned 400 and something acres of property. He was a very good man, very professional man. He was a pilot for Transworld Airlines for many years. He was a very well established man, very friendly, polite, and he loved classical music. Me, on the other hand, I was really into hip hop that was coming out. I remember family members would play older music. I would hear my mother listen to music from the 60s, and different people listen to music from 60s and 70s. And I think that's probably one of the key points for me studying the 60s and 70s is the adults all listen to music from the 60s and 70s, my uncles and whatnot. But I was into hip-hop around this time. And I remember you had a few rappers at this period, 92, 93, around 93, that were very notable. You had rappers such as, Eazy-E. You had... who was really coming? Heavy D. I remember rappers like Heavy D. You would still see them, but there was a rapper. My first rap tape that I bought was a soundtrack to the movie Juice. And I remember I did not go see the movie Juice. I know people who went to go see it, but I did not see the movie Juice at the movie theater. And back then, when a movie was rated R, you had to have your parent there with you to get in and whatnot, and I was a little bit too young anyway to be aspiring to go watch Juice. I remember when it came out on VHS, and at that time in the early 90s, it took about 9 months for a film to make it to VHS. It's not like today, where a movie comes out in movie theaters, 2 weeks later you can get the DVD. Sometimes it'll be at the theater the same time the DVD's out. At that point in time in the early 90s, if you went and watched a film, 9 months, a year sometimes. Sometimes you'd wait a year for it to come out on VHS. Okay, maybe the soundtrack would be out a lot sooner, but the film, you're going to wait in line for that, right? Unless you're a Hollywood insider. So I got the soundtrack on cassette tape to the movie Juice. Okay, and I remember I never owned a tape before, so I got the tape. I got the little cassette tape. And I remember putting it in and listening to it, and I remember listening to Too Short. Too Short was on there. I remember Too Short was on the soundtrack, but I was more familiar with the character Tupac Shakur played, known as Bishop, in the film, and I was hoping to hear Bishop on the tape, but I didn't even know who Tupac Shakur was. I just knew the part that was played in the film. Anyhow, I got the cassette tape. Too Short, a bunch of other rappers were on there. It was really interesting to sit back and listen to all these. Then I saw Samuel L. Jackson was in the movie Juice, and at that time you didn't have, there was no Google. There probably was Yahoo, but very few people had computers. At this time, you can get magazines from the store that would have told you about the film, or, I guess you could have took it upon yourself to make phone calls and call companies and ask for information, but write letters and stuff. You can do that kind of stuff, but there was no, I didn't have access to any internet back in 1993. Nobody you knew had a computer. If you did know somebody with a computer, to get on there and start researching stuff was very different. There's a lot less websites, a lot less information available. You might have been able to pull up a mainstream website, like whoever did the picture, like Paramount or Universal or Warner Brothers or something, to a film, and get in, see the executives' phone numbers and stuff. And go. But actually researching was a lot more challenging. So anyhow. So we're going to go into that. My first soundtrack was my first tape, audio cassette tape I got to the movie Juice. There was a lot of films that came out that year. There was a whole lot of different films, movies that came out, music. I'm gonna go back and look at some more information, listen to it. But I'm gonna be coming out with a series, and this is really about getting to know me. If you've never met me and you don't know me, and you've seen some of the work I've done over the years, and you've seen some of the stuff that's gone on, you're wondering like, who really is this person? Jameel does interviews and Jameels on the net, with these videos, and you might not really get what you're seeing. So this is a time I'm going to go into more simple things. Okay. There was a time I went and saw, I remember, 93, matter of fact, I remember going to see the film Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park came out at the movie theaters. That was a very interesting film. I went to go see that film when it first came out. My grandfather took me to go see it. Right. So I'm keying in on things, films and movies that everybody can relate to. I'm sure somebody's going to relate to some of the movies that I'm speaking out. Other movie, Death Becomes Her, was another movie. I'm sure a lot of women who were around at the time will remember that movie. Poison Ivy, Fear. Remember Fear with Marky Mark? There's a lot of films that came out in 95, 94, somewhere there. So we're going to be looking at a lot of different films, a lot of different music, and going into the era, and then I'm going to relate people back to me, what was going on with me at the time. And so this is going to be a little interesting presentation, and this is the official Jameel Rawls channel. Okay, and right now I'm going through a private study, reading tons of books, a lot of different interesting stuff, and I use my craft as a presenter to help myself reflect and help other people reflect. Okay, and so now Billy Grogan was a very interesting artist in the early 90s. He was lead singer for the group Smashing Pumpkins. Now I remember Billy Grogan when the drummer died to Smashing Pumpkins, right? And I remember Billy Grogan. He came out with a double disc album, double cassette, double disc album. They had Tonight, 1979 featured on there. I remember you had other alternative rock groups like Green Day, Nirvana comes to mind. I remember a lot of different people on my age group, would listen to different sorts of music. And I remember speaking to these people and seeing the trends that they were in. When you go through, at that time, when I was going through school, I remember I went to a lot of different schools, but I remember a lot of the white kids would have skateboards and listen to alternative music. Not white children, a lot of the black children would listen to, remember, No Limit Records. No Limit Records started coming about in the mid-90s with Master P and Silk the Shocker. I remember that, and not too many people hear about No Limit Records anymore. And my personal view on that label was No Limit Records was sort of the prelude to what Cash Money took a lot of their strategy from. Lil Wayne and Cash Money have a lot of strategy that was very comparable to what Master P. I think his name was Percy Ellis or something like that. Percy. But I think, Cash Money. A lot of their strategy is very comparable to No Limit Records. Puffy was around. Now he's called P. Diddy, but Puffy was around. And you know what? There was an arcade in downtown Muskegon, Michigan. It's gone now. There used to be an old mall that was put in back in the 1970s. And there was an arcade room there called Laser One. And I used to go down there and hang out with I had friends. We used to walk all the way down there. There was an area that I went to elementary school in, known as Muskegon Heights. And we used to walk all the way from the Heights all the way downtown just to play video games. Sometimes I would go down there by myself, right? And we would sit there. We would play Street Fighter. We would play Mortal Kombat. We would play Killer Instinct. We would play Virtual Fighter. The shooting game Area 51. There was tons of other games in there. There was so many games. And there at one point in time, there was an arcade room downstairs in the old mall. Now the mall has moved. Now they got it in a different area. But at that time, they had one arcade room. Then downstairs was an older arcade room. And then there was a bus stop right by the entrance of the mall to the arcade. And people from all over the country would come into the arcade just to play a few games. People from military, people going back and forth to college, people running away from home. Teenagers sometimes would run away from home and they would have a ticket and they'd end up at the arcade. And so I met a lot of different people playing video games at the arcade, okay, and talking to these different people coming in. And it was around this time that I developed a strategy on a video game. I used to win like 90-something% of the games I played. There was a strategy I would use. My favorite character was Ken on Street Fighter, and a strategy I would use, it'd be a jump kick, then a sweep, a jump kick, then a sweep, a jump kick, then a sweep. I kept doing that, and I kept winning, right? Okay, now that's around the same era, the early 90s. This is interesting. This is really interesting. This is because my previous work was based on the 60s and 70s, and I didn't know. I wasn't around when the Beach Boys album came out. I wasn't around when the Beatles album came out. I wasn't around, in the 70s when James Brown album came out, or whoever. I wasn't around then. This is an era in the early 90s I was around for, and I remember these individuals. I remember the presidents, Bill Clinton. I remember the whole Monica Lewinsky thing. I remember around the time Bill Clinton the voting was coming up, the election was coming up. You know, that was very interesting. I remember all that stuff. It's amazing how much you can remember. And so I'm gonna put out a little presentation and just go through. Of course, we're gonna have some guests. We're gonna have some guests. We're gonna have some guests eventually come on. You know, and some of the people might have been, some of the people might have been singers or rappers or have done recordings and have done shows themselves. Some of the people might have been writers. Some of them may have even been actors. You know, who knows? Maybe we can catch up with a B movie actor and find out what it was actually like to be in the film back at that time. You know, somebody who's not in the industry anymore and now things are more relaxed. They're a regular person like me and you, and they want to do a little interview and explain how that affected their life and what it means to them to be in acting. You know, and so we're gonna go through. You know, we're gonna go down the list and see what we can get involved with. You know, and it's going to be quite interesting. Okay, and this is Jameel Rawls. This is the Jameel Rawls official channel. And I just remember, you'd be surprised the kind of people I know, the kind of people I meet. I'm from a small town in Michigan. There's not really a lot going on here. But, you know, I've been all over I've met people all over the place, whatnot. So we're going to see what we can dig up. See if we can find something that people will remember, people forgot about, something that happened back in 92, 93, 94, an incident, everybody forgot about it. We're going to see if we can get it back going and see if people can remember. Be very interesting, brain stimulating. All right.
La da 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 da. Hello,